I would say we reached a zenith in terms of budget and headcount probably in the 1990s. And that's when, in the 2000s, our budget problems started to manifest themselves at the state level. And so we, like other state agencies, began to contract. And now I would say we're at most 2/3 of what we were at, maybe less in terms of budget and headcount. So we've had to retrench over the years and sort of shrink down to our core functions. But then by the 2010s, I would say we're really struggling to manage some of these new realities. And then this hit, a budget impasse, where we had no budget for 3 years, from 2015 to 2017. And our expenditures at that point shrunk down to just staff salaries. So we could keep our people and keep them working, but we had no dollars for project work, for construction, for grants, for anything like that. And we kind of went into our groundhog hole during that period. And I'll be honest, recovery had been kind of a slow process. But we have appropriations again, and I want to focus on those positives. We have through the Rebuild Illinois capital plan, we've been able to fund capital funds for grants, for land acquisition, for dam removals. I'll talk a little bit about that in particular in this presentation. And for Corps of Engineers ecosystem restoration matching funds, and I'll say a word about that too. So we were really starting to come out and hitting a stride again. And then, of course, this happened. COVID hit, and of course, our initial response was to close all of our state parks for about 2 months. We were one of the few open space agencies that did that. Most other states and local agencies kept them open. We did not, for reasons that don't matter anymore. It seemed the right thing to do at the time. But what it meant is, in spring, right about now, we're about to launch our spring turkey hunting on state lands, for instance. And when we closed our parks, we had to tell our hunters, well, you can't hunt on our lands. But they had paid for permits, and we also had to tell them that we had no way to refund their money because we had no authority to do that under our administrative rules. So this didn't make us really popular. What we had to do in that case is actually rewrite administrative rules to allow us to refund their money. That didn't happen until later in the summer. So that's just one example of how everything became twice as hard to do, and it took twice as long. Eventually, we did reopen, but again, our processes were very difficult, and we had to develop workarounds for just about everything. On the flip side of that, that second bullet there, the great outdoors has been rediscovered, and every open space agency and Fish and Wildlife Agency has had the same experience. As an example of the benefits from that, even though our campgrounds were closed for 2 months during the initial phase of the pandemic, once we opened them, we had a surge of visitors, and we ended up over the year having record camping receipts. Similarly, our fishing license sales were up 18%, and we're instantly relevant and very popular. So the question now is, will that persist, and should we be concerned? And the answer to that is, should we be concerned question is yes, but for reasons that actually go beyond the pandemic after effects. And it's for this reason: the world is changing, and Fish and Wildlife agencies are concerned about that. Conservation is in transition with the rest of the world. The demographics are changing. Where people live is changing. What people value is changing. Most of the urban residents are not hunters or anglers, but they value the natural world no less than our traditional constituents, but in broader ways, more for overall biodiversity conservation than for huntable or fishable species. But here's the challenge. Our revenues of Fish and Wildlife agencies still come largely from this guy and his or her counterparts who carry fishing rods. This is me, by the way, and my dearly beloved but deceased English setter Packer, named after my favorite football team, I might add, for those of you from Wisconsin on the call here. I don't want to diminish the continued importance and relevance of hunters and anglers, but in Illinois, hunters now are about 2% of the population. Anglers a bit more than that, but still quite a small proportion overall. But we have to shift our focus above and beyond the traditional constituency because we're asked to deal now with unprecedented environmental challenges and societal changes that just weren't on our plates when this funding model was first conceived. So it's created this sort of existential crisis of sorts that has us questioning our continued relevance now and into the future. And it is a big conversation going on within Fish and Wildlife agencies right now. And this is the reality of it. The world is changing, and we can either take it by the hand or rest assuredly it's going to take us by the throat. And that's what we're concerned about. So we're spending a lot of time on this right now. The Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, which every Fish and Wildlife agency is part of, spent a couple of years developing this, what we call the relevancy roadmap. It was unveiled and officially adopted about a year ago. And one of the things, this is a great roadmap, by the way, you can easily find it online, and it has a lot of ideas about how we can change our focus to become more relevant and maintain that relevancy. One of the things that the association realizes is that we have to have shifts in our base funding to deal with our future challenges. Some states are already there, those that have, for instance, sales taxes to support this broader mission, but many of us who still rely on hunter and angler revenues, we need to think about changes in base funding. One of the things that's on the immediate horizon, and I mean immediate now, is this. Recovering America's Wildlife Act. It was introduced into the previous Congress and actually came out of the House. It'll have to be reintroduced and will be reintroduced very shortly, but this is going to be a conservation game changer. An additional $1.4 billion annually to states and tribes. For Illinois, our estimated additional revenues would be about $25 million a year. I don't know what the comparable figure for Wisconsin is, probably more than that. But this will put us, this revenue, by the way, is federal funding that's connected to our state wildlife action plans. Every state agency has this. These focus on the species of greatest conservation need. We used to just refer to them as non-game species. Now we use this additional new terminology. Many of these are already listed as threatened or endangered at the state level, and they need focused action to keep the common species common or keep the rare species at the state level from getting onto that federal list of threatened and endangered species. This is really important, and it will be reintroduced, we think, very shortly. I heard yesterday somebody say, we're in the red zone for this now, and into our 2-minute drill. This is not a 2-year planning horizon for this. It's quite literally a 2-month horizon for getting this to the finish line. So I want to urge everybody to do what you can to work with your congressional delegation to get this thing over the finish line. So enough about Fish and Wildlife agencies generally. I'll talk a little bit about some of our primary initiatives new on the horizon here for us. When the previous administration pulled out of the Paris agreements, Governor Pritzker responded by having Illinois join the U.S. Climate Alliance. And this is this association of about 25 states, including Puerto Rico, who have agreed to support the policies and actions that advance the Paris Climate Accord. What we've done within the DNR is we've stepped this down to our our agency level, and we're focusing on state lands and what we can do to mitigate climate change. We have about 500,000 acres, most of that in natural habitat, which is sequestering and storing carbon as we speak, and hopefully we could adapt our management to increase that function. But I want to focus particularly on the lands we farm right now. We farm about 35,000 acres of tillable land. 33,000 of this is in row crop production with a little bit in CRP. But we have a great opportunity to push carbon storage onto our tillable acreage by managing those differently. We have leases with over 200 tenant farmers, and we joined forces with about 10 or 12 other state organizations to try and get a regional conservation partnership program grant. These are grants offered through NRCS of USDA, and we were successful. And so our piece of that will allow us to pay for cover crops on about 8,000 of those acres right out of the gate. And we'll do that for 3 years. And what this will be essentially is a bridge for our tenant farmers to get them to a point where their acreage is in better ecological health, and they can continue this work on their own. We would expect that after 3 years that our leases would require that our tenants continue with cover cropping on their own. So again, this is a bit of a bridge. And we'll also experiment with mixes that can create overwintering wildlife habitat, things like that. And we'll have a research component in it as well to see how well cover crops function. And we'll have a demonstration component in that. So can we ask our tenant farmers to show their neighbors how this can work? And that's what farmers listen to, is their friends and neighbors who have shown it can work. Second thing we're doing is we're investigating the possibility of solar installations on DNR lands, and we want to determine which sites are suitable. We want to ID and rank the opportunity areas, and then develop an RFP to actually do this. And U of I is working with us on all of this, and so we're very hopeful that we can generate enough electricity, for instance, to offset all of Illinois DNR's electricity needs as a start. So moving on, Asian carp obviously are a continuing priority for us, and we're working with the Asian Carp Regional Coordinating Committee across the Great Lakes. For years, we've had a major role in managing Asian carp, particularly in keeping them out of the Great Lakes. And we're working primarily in a couple of areas. One is the area near Chicago where the electrical barriers are. And we're doing seasonal monitoring and then implementing response actions to make sure that no fish get through those barriers, and if they do, we're prepared to deal with them. And then in the next area downriver, we're working to suppress populations and reduce population sizes, primarily by employing commercial fishermen to physically go in on an annual basis and remove them. And they've removed many hundreds of thousands of pounds of fish, and it is having a measurable effect on Asian carp populations in the Illinois River, the upper Illinois in particular, because you want to keep them from even getting to the barriers in any significant numbers at all. But the thing that's on the horizon here affects really that next big reach downriver, where there are lots of Asian carp in great abundance. And our newest push there involves a marketing and branding initiative. The idea here is this. We want to promote commercial markets to manage and reduce population sizes and use the private sector to help push that. These fish are here to stay. There is no eradication hope for that, except in very limited situations. Currently, our management relies on annual federal appropriations, and that's sort of not a resilient way to do our business. The Great Lakes fish management community has largely come around to this approach. We've been somewhat haphazardly trying to promote these fish as food fish for the last 10 years, but now what we've done, again, using federal funds, is we've contracted with a commercial branding and marketing firm to develop a strategy, a professional strategy, and now we're implementing that. And we'll be rolling out some things, including a new name, a restaurant name, a marketing name for this fish in April at some point. I can't share with you what that'll be. It'll be a secret, but pay attention and you'll see that and you can think back to this presentation. Okay, now I want to move on to the Fox River itself and share some of the work that DNR is involved with on the Fox. And I'll start with this Fox River profile, because one of the things I want to talk about is our involvement in flooding, recurring flooding. We have a number of problem areas. One of them is the Chain Lakes and Upper Fox River. And I love these exaggerated river profiles because you can see how the Fox River starts on the left side. That's Wisconsin. You see the state line as the dashed line in the middle, Illinois on the southerly or right side. And you see the Fox River tumbles out of the mountains west of Milwaukee. And then it hits the state line and the profile just flattens out and becomes a big pool table. And that's most pronounced between the state line itself and that dam at Algonquin, which is the second dam down. These two dams create a lot of flat water that's used extensively for recreational boating. The shores are lined with residences. This is the stretch that's overseen by the Fox Waterway Agency, and I understood that you heard from them earlier today. But because that landscape is a pool table, water just can't move down slope very rapidly. So it kind of, when a lot of water hits it, it just tends to spread out and causes flooding. And then once it gets past Algonquin, it goes over a procession of 10 additional low-head dams. Then that final dam at Dayton, which is used for hydropower generation. Those dams in between, those low-head dams, are relics from a day when they functioned to create mechanical power to function to work grist mills and lumber mills and things like that. And those original functions are gone, and now they function to support recreational boating and for aesthetic purposes. But it does create opportunities as they require periodic maintenance. So let's go back to that pool table for a minute. You'll see it. The top of the slide is the state line. And then there's that line of, this is a heat map, that line of flood insurance claim densities. And this is one way to assess the extent of flooding. And that first group of hot spots down to where you see Cary there, that's the Algonquin area, that's that pool table. And so you'll see that the flood claims are concentrated up there. There's another small set of concentrated claims down between Elgin and St. Charles, but not quite like the Upper Fox. One way to measure this then is by total claims. Since the start of the flood insurance program, there's been a total of about $12 million in flood insurance claims. And one thing that I want to point out here and make clear is that all of those dams, one thing they don't do is provide very significant flood protection. The exception, limited exception, might be the Stratton Dam. This is it here, that impounds the Chain Lakes to create a navigation pool. This is undergoing an overhaul, by the way. We call it the Stratton Dam Life Extension Project. And it'll involve expansion of the lock and then also a new gate structure. This is essentially finished, and it'll be opened up, and we hope to have some kind of a ribbon cutting shortly. But there is a grave misunderstanding about the extent to which this structure can really manage flooding to a very significant extent. Again, it was designed to create a navigation pool for recreation on the chain. There's only about 18 inches of elevation. That's all the freeboard we have to work with. And we do use it strategically to try and balance water elevations between upriver and downriver. But it's not a huge tool for us. We do draw it down in the winter to create some storage for the spring floods. But again, 18 inches is about all we have to work with. And when we get hit by torrential floods, it really can't do the work. Like, for instance, when the flood of 2017 hit, and that was a big one. And what that one caused was for the Illinois state legislature to create this Fox River Flood Commission. And the commission, including representatives from all the affected counties and some other strategic appointees. This commission was intended not to be a permanent body, but really more of an ad hoc group to take a look at flooding on the upper Fox, particularly as precipitated by the flood of 2017, and do several things. Frame the flooding situation for lawmakers, characterize it, describe it, identify what's keeping us from developing a better flood response, and then consider the usefulness of a more permanent flood control partnership of those same counties and others to better coordinate a flood response on the Fox River. So one of the things they were asked to do was talk about shortfalls. This is the report. It was issued about a year ago. And they did identify a number of shortfalls. A few of them, there is no bi-state watershed planning effort. There's limited understanding of how the dams function in flood management, especially the Stratton and Algonquin dams. There's limited river and rainfall gauges. There's an inconsistent regulatory approach across the entire watershed, including Wisconsin and Illinois and some others. One primary recommendation that came out of it is that we should continue a Fox River Coalition as an ad hoc informal group. And it should start with the Fox Waterway Agency and then representatives from each of the 11 counties across both sides of the state line. That meeting was scheduled for March of 2020. You'll recall what happened then. Today is the sort of the unofficial anniversary of the pandemic. It's when everything broke. Anyway, that group did not meet. As far as I know, they have not met yet. And I don't know what the schedule looks like, but there's been a new event that's happened since then as well. And that happened in the 2020 Water Resources Development Act, WRDA, as we call it. Fox River Flood Risk Management Study was authorized in WRDA of 2020. And this was due to the action of Congresswoman Lauren Underwood from Illinois. So that study authorization was in WRDA. It was not funded in their 21 work plan. It likely won't be funded before FY23 is what my contacts at the Corps tell me. They do want to work on developing a project scope, but there's none yet. So the best I can say that it's kind of an idea at this point that will need further fleshing out. And now I want to talk a little bit about dams and the Fox River ecosystem, which for me as a biologist is the part that's nearest and dearest to my heart. I've talked a bit about what the dams don't really do, and they don't really assist significantly in flood control. What they do is a couple of things. One is they provide, depending on a person's aesthetic sense, they provide pools that are always full, bank to bank. They can be a source of tranquility and quiet reflection. They contribute to local identity. They're aesthetic amenities. The second thing they do, and by the way, people value them for that purpose. The second thing they do is they allow for continuous motorized recreational boating. And that too is not a small thing. and witness their use on hot summer weekends. A lot of use by recreational boaters and others enjoying those pools. So that's not a small thing. A third thing that they do, unfortunately, is they seriously impair river ecology. And you can measure this by the diversity of fish, mussel, and aquatic invertebrate communities in those pools above each of those dams. They do this by interrupting upstream movements of fish and mussels. They do this by depositing sediment on their upstream sides, and that smothers aquatic life. And they do that by creating low oxygen conditions on those upstream pools that prohibit the survival of organisms intolerant of low oxygen. And these are not good things. So what you end up with dams that have strong supporters and strong detractors for these various things that people value them for or don't value them for. And so decisions about dams typically only happen through community conversations. And right now, and for the past 10 years, a lot of these conversations have been going on, and they've led to the removal a couple of these dams. And there may be more in the offing as people start to slide over toward the environmental health perspective. But however you look at them, for good or for not for good, they are significant features. And whether you measure it by surface area or by river miles, somewhere around half of the entire Fox River in Illinois is impounded by these dams, and they're no small feature, and so they're directly under the influence about half of the river. We started to really become aware and alert about the impacts of these dams with this report that came out back in 2003. Principal author was my good friend and colleague, Vic Santucci. He worked for the Max McGraw Wildlife Foundation at that time. Shortly after that, he joined Illinois DNR. He now runs our Lake Michigan program. But this is one of those seminal studies, and I credit a lot of the attention and the action on the Fox River with respect to dams, and I attribute it back to this report. It quantified their effect on river ecology and started these serious conversations. A lot of the data that supported that report came out of decades of Fox River Basin fish surveys that the Illinois DNR had done. These were good data, and that's continued since, most recently with this basin survey in 27. And has created some good information to inform dam removals. One of these relates to quantification of those data into IBI, Index of Biotic Integrity scores. And IBI, probably most of you are familiar with this, but it's a measure of river health based on the composition of fish communities. And we've been able to document the effects of dams on fish populations by comparing upstream versus downstream data. And on the horizontal axis, you see listed all of the various dams, and for each, there's an IBI score for the upstream or impounded reach, or the downstream or free-flowing reach. Upstream reach, I think that's colored brown to reflect all the sediment that's up in those upstream reaches, in those pools up there. But what you see clearly just scanning the whole graph is that IBI scores are higher, in most cases significantly higher, in the free-flowing downstream reaches than in the impounded upstream reaches. And these data are consistent with data from everywhere, across the continent, across the world. And it's a clear consequence of dams that people are quite aware of now. DNR has also been involved with the removal of quite a few dams across northeastern Illinois, not just the Fox, but in the Des Plaines watershed and the Chicago River watershed. And it's given us the opportunity to do before and after assessments of the changes that we've seen in fish communities. And so here are 5 of them where we've been able to do those assessments before removal and after removal. The metric here is number of fish species, which we call species richness. And you see again, invariably, the scores are, the numbers are higher after removal than before removal, actually quite significantly higher. So good data to inform what we might be able to expect on the Fox River with future dam removals. We have less data on mussels, but we're working on a project right now, about to launch it, the Illinois DNR in cooperation with the Wisconsin DNR through a state wildlife grant. And this will develop a snapshot of current mussel assemblages across the Fox River on both sides of the state line. There are historically 34 species known from the watershed. This will give us, again, that snapshot of what the current priority assemblages look like and where they are. It'll have a special focus on the rainbow mussel, which you see here. It's considered a species of greatest conservation need by both states in our state wildlife action plans. And so we'll focus on this one, and actually part of this project will involve propagation of the rainbow mussel and then implementing an augmentation plan on the Wisconsin side to see if we can augment existing or create new populations where they've been lost. So this should give us quite a bit of good data about mussel populations in the Fox. I'm going to wrap up here. Illinois DNR is working on several potential dam removals on the main stem, and I want to share our involvement with you on these. The 2 red ones, the red arrows, Carpentersville Dam and North Aurora Dam, they are right now in the study and design stage for removal, and we fully expect that these will be removed in the next several years. Carpentersville perhaps as soon as next year. The 2 dark brown arrows, or dark blue arrows, are 2 additional projects. We've had just preliminary discussions with Batavia and Montgomery that we feel they'll likely lead to full-blown studies of potential dam modifications, which could include removal or at least improving them for fish passage. So we're pretty hopeful about these. If all of them were to be removed or modified, it could create connectivity from the lowest Dayton Dam all the way up through Yorkville and all the way up to Geneva. So that would be a real significant reopening of that stretch of the lower Fox. And then finally, I want to bring to your attention this ongoing Fox River connectivity and habitat study under Section 519 of the Illinois River Basin Ecosystem Restoration Program. This is a Corps of Engineers program. About, 10 or 15 years ago now, I think it was back in 2007, they issued a report on their Illinois River Basin Ecosystem Restoration Program that looked at the feasibility of restoring the entire river basin. And then since then, there have been a number of projects, smaller scale projects that have spun off of that. And this is one of those. And the purpose, as you see, is to recommend a plan for ecological restoration of the Fox River Study Reach. That's Dayton to Algonquin. It should have some hopefully strong recommendations to make on some of those additional main stem dams, as well as some of the tributary dams. This study has been 50% completed for actually some time now, and it came to a halt when we had our budget impasse, but we are prepared to get it going again. And this is key, we've had critical support from the Fox River Study Group, a group of local governments around along the Fox River, as well as some critical NGOs who are working together. And they've come up with a non-federal match which then we, as the non-federal sponsor, can use to come up to provide our funds for finishing this study. The Corps of Engineers was not able to get it into this year's work plan, but we hope that next year that will happen. So stay tuned for that, but that's good news as well. All right, and then I'll just end with this. The director's priority, Director Colleen Callahan, wonderful director to work with. I really value my relationship with her. She's a professional communicator, came from the agricultural world, but has really taken on the mantle of natural resource agency management. And her priority is this, and it's a way of working challenge: communicate, collaborate, and connect. And I think it's very easy for big agencies, no matter whether you're natural resources or otherwise, to get down into your silos and keep your head down and focused on your work. But the best work happens when you reach out, not only within your own agency, but outside your agency, and work collaboratively with other agencies and partners, leverage your funds, leverage your intellectual capacity. And that is the way the conservation business works these days. And I'm certainly of the same mindset. So I'll just end by saying it has been a great pleasure to communicate and connect with you all today. And with that, Jeff, I'll turn it back to you, and you can handle as you see appropriate.
All right, thank you, John. Yeah, and I think those priorities of communicating, collaborating, and connecting is really how the Fox River Summit all got started, and what all of our partner organizations are still working towards. We do have some questions for you that came up that several people have asked. The first one is, could we get commercial fishing and start a demand for Asian carp nationwide? But of course, as I know you and I have talked, at some point, this would significantly reduce the populations. The downside would be the demand and some negative impacts that may have. So just wondered about your thoughts on a nationwide campaign for Asian carp as a food.
So I think that's definitely possible. All of this will depend on whether we're successful in convincing people that this is a good food fish. And by the way, it is. I have some in my freezer at home, and it's ground Asian carp, and it's kind of a go-to meal now for me to make Asian carp fish patties. It's a great food fish. It's a very healthful fish, very low in contaminants, very high in omega-3s, which are good for people. So there are some health benefits to be had. We're trying to get over the stigma associated with the name carp, which our marketing folks feel that's the biggest impediment right now. Hence the marketing effort to refer to them as healthy fish, wild caught fish from the wild waters of Illinois or wherever you're from, and then to actually rename them itself. So, but if we can get traction there and show that people will start to buy this, then yes, I think a national campaign is possible. There are other states, Kentucky in particular, already thinking along these lines. Famous Cajun chef in Louisiana who is serving them in his restaurants there. So we're gaining a little bit of steam, and I think it is the long-term solution. It may mean we end up having to manage them at some level of sustainability, and this is where the pushback has happened. But again, we're not getting rid of them. They're not going away. They're here to stay. We have to manage them in a way that they can coexist with our native aquatic fauna, and then be useful to people at the same time. So I think we'll see how this plays out, and ours is a pilot effort in that regard.
All right, very good. Thank you, John. I think we have maybe time for one more question. Can you comment on how the Corps of Engineers Illinois River Plan influences the Fox River, and are there any updates on the Illinois River Plan?
I don't know that the Illinois River Plan has been updated, and it just may be my ignorance. I may not be aware of it, but the significance is that the Fox River is part of that Illinois River overall study. And so anything on the Fox, any tributary to the Illinois River, the Fox, the Kankakee, and others are eligible to be considered for step down projects under Section 519. And that's the authority that's being used here. And the great thing is, now that we have a source of non-federal match, then we can use that to leverage federal funds. And then, depending on what their recommendations are, we would be then set up nicely to do a project implementation with them. Again, leveraging local funds with federal funding. So it's all opportunity, and we're really looking forward to getting that project going again and getting to the final recommendation so that we can get to implementation, because I think that's what we're all about.
Right, implementation is indeed what we're all about. So with that, I think we've pretty much come to the end of our time. There are a number of questions that we didn't have a chance to get to. And I don't know, Eric, maybe you can comment on if there's a way that we can provide answers to these folks another way, but I will turn it back to you, Eric.
Yeah, thank you, Jeff. And thank you, John. That was an excellent presentation. We do allow, like John, if he wanted to, he can log into the system and see some of those questions. The chat over there will stay open so people can continue to have discussions in the chat about this talk as well. There were just some sort of friendly comments and certainly some appreciative comments of John's time with us and the presentation that he gave. So I encourage him to go check that out. I would also say that we are taking a break here, basically a 15-minute break that allows people to go use the restrooms or do what they need to do. But the next sessions will start at 11:30. And if you go back to the agenda on the platform, you'll see that you have your options. So you're not sort of committed to just one track of presentations. You get to pick which one you'd like to attend during the next session. So please take a look at those descriptions and choose which one you'd like to navigate to. I encourage you also to check out some of the different exhibitors. One thing that'll play off of what John was just talking about, one of our sponsors for this whole event is a group called Eat Wisconsin Fish. And this is a national Sea Grant funded effort to try to get consumers to think about eating local fish instead of just going to the supermarket and buying whatever. We do have some viable fisheries around the region, and this type of approach of eating locally has certainly gained some attention as well as some popularity. So check out the Eat Wisconsin Fish sponsor page and think about maybe there's going to be a new program on the horizon, if there isn't one already, about Eat Illinois Fish. So by all means, please peruse around the site, and we'll see you at the next session starting at 11:30.